Welcome to Next Level Thing, Episode 6. Our society is based on theft and slavery. I want to start with the quote from Jeremy Locke's books, The End of All Evil. Take a look at the generic historic example of the pattern of tyranny. A rogue thug gathers together abandoned men to extort money from the people nearby where he lives. In his success, he plunders massive amount of money and grows his gang into an army. He successfully kills the previous officers of law enforcement or subverts them through stealth. Knowing that he can plunder more in value in the long term, he leaves his victims alive. He implements a tax upon everyone in the range of the influence. He draws borders, he gives decrees. Importantly, he promises his victims that he will protect them from all other thugs. His victims slowly become accustomed to his will and his lies. The people become afraid if they hear their neighbors talk of escaping the taxes and cruelty. Soon they actively support the regime by targeting all treasonous speech, turning in deviants to police. Originally called a criminal, the thug is now called authority. He is called law and order. This episode, I'm actually going to have two quotes, and they both relate to this topic. So the second quote is from one of David Icke's books. If you added together all the forms of taxation that we pay in a year and subtracted that from your income, you would be shocked of how much energy you receive for your energy given goes back into the system in taxation alone. Ultimately, this money/energy ends up in the Rothschild lake, and this is what, despite the ever-increasing taxation, we get an ever-decreasing quality of services, which this money is supposed to be paying for. Add to all this the interest paid to the banks for borrowing non-existent money called credit, and you can see that humanity is being energetically and systematically sucked dry. Something else is being stuck dry also: choice and potential. How often are people denied what they want to do or where they want to go by the mantra of, I can't afford it, I don't have enough money. Our money is part of an energy field, part of us, because that ownership makes vibrational connection between our energy field and that of money. Giving and receiving money is energy in, energy out. Look at all the above, and you can see that the masses are being manipulated to give out far more energy than they're getting back. Even after the original exchange has taken place in the form of salary or profit, most of what we receive is then consumed by taxation, interest on money, and artificially inflated costs for essential services. The economic system headed by House of Rothschild has created to vampire the life force of the global population. The public see money, but the Rothschilds see everything as energy, which of course it is. We call money currency, but it should be called currency. This is how the Rothschild use it, as an electrical current which they circulate and then give back a much greater voltage, or plus interest. David Icke. One of the primary ways our society is based on theft is taxation, and I have sources if you want to see and look further into this. The basic premise is if you don't pay taxes, then you will eventually be forced to pay by going to jail under coercion. I mean, you can choose not to, because you always have a choice, no matter, even if you're being coerced or not. But if you are coerced under your will, then you do not have a willful or voluntary choice, which makes it immoral and which also makes it theft. And like one of the examples is if you go to the source of the website Explore is taxationtheft.com, you can see it's a great website, probably the best source I would recommend for understanding this, and it just goes through the whole process of, it's like Socratic method of asking questions to determine, or asking you questions you might have about that, and then showing that it is indeed theft, even if you think otherwise. One of the big arguments against this taxation not being theft is that people are born in a country, therefore they have to agree with the laws of the country, but you do not get to choose to be born in a country. For one, it's forced upon you, and you don't sign a contract at any point in your life actually to agree with all the laws of the state. You are just forced to obey them, even though you never signed a contract, which would make the laws invalid, since you have to have a contract to agree with something, or at least of that magnitude. A system like that of the magnitude that we have, you would have to at least agree with the social contract to begin with. Another common argument is, well, we have a democracy, so it isn't theft because we agree of what is taxed and how much, but that's the group deciding how much. I'm talking about the individual. The individual has no choice on accepting whether they choose to fund the government or not, or how much, or on what products or services. And you can say, well, you can vote, but your vote only counts if it breaks a tie. And there has never been a tie in any democracy ever. So your vote does not matter. You have to do what the government tells you in terms of paying taxes then. You have no individual choice. Another thing is the government claims it has the right to rob you, and this is a great video by Larkin Rose. I have it linked in the sources and references, but basically he has a piece of paper and originally it just says, I have the right to rob you. And that does sound absurd. Someone just write down on a piece of paper, I have the right to rob you. And then he goes on, well, I got a group of my buddies and they say we have the right to rob you. Well, does that make it right? Well, no, of course it doesn't. Any sane person would say, no, that still doesn't give you the right. And then he says, well, I got a group of my buddies, and now what if on that piece of paper it was written in fancier terms, instead of calling I'm allowed to rob you, it said I'm allowed to tax you, which sounds a little bit less aggressive or violent. And then what if it was written on an old piece of paper in fancy looking cursive writing? That is essentially what the Constitution is, at least the taxation part. It says it's basically the creators of the Constitution saying we have the right to rob you. And I'm not saying that the Constitution is all bad. It has some good ideas in it, but the Constitution was a compromise. People have to understand that. The first 10 amendments are rights, human rights, and then the rest is just a bunch of nonsense, mostly. Like a significant number of the amendments afterwards were complete nonsense. It was like a compromise between the more authoritarian federalist versus the less authoritarian non-federalist. But this is also true for really any country. You'll see that some document in the government or something will say we have the right to rob you in fancy letters and complicated paralegal sounding terms and whatnot, but that's what it boils down to. I have another quote. This is one from Frederick Bastiat from his book, The Law. See whether the law takes from some person to that which belongs to them to give to others what does not belong to them. See whether the law performs for the profit of one citizen and to the injury of other. An act that this citizen cannot perform without committing a crime. What taxes go to does not mean that it isn't theft, although if you really do your research, taxes don't go to what most people think in almost any country. There is what is the ostensible reason, which means what appears to be, such as basic military defense, courts, police, and welfare, things that most people want, at least to some extent. That is true, but there's also black budgets and other things that almost everyone would disagree with, like taxes mostly go to war. I know that's more controversial, but not everyone's going to support every war. I know that, but it doesn't matter, again, what it goes to. Going to people who already have enough money, who, like, it doesn't make any sense. Like one John Stossel video shows that a lot of taxes just go to people who have plenty enough money anyways. And another thing is corporate welfare, and I'm not talking about small corporations like small businesses, since a corporation can be small or large, but like I said, mostly going to people who have already plenty enough money and they're trying to bend the rules of the game in order to favor them because, well, they want to take and steal money from people by lobbying the government, or they want to become richer. It isn't done through a democratic process. Oftentimes, the introduction of higher or new taxes, it is often done by lobbying the politicians who make the taxes instead of voting. So you really even have less of a say than you may think. It's not even really a democratic process oftentimes. So even at a collective level, you really don't have a choice oftentimes as well whether to pay taxes or not. Another great article is by Slayerman, and he argues we pay cops to take our money. And what he means by that is we pay taxes so that cops can basically extort people through tickets and also civil asset forfeiture. And of course, such as the IRS agents, the enforcement of taxation as well. And cops do, in fact, have ticket quotas, so they're not just pulling people over because they want to help with traffic or whatever. That's just the reason they say. So people will accept the tickets, but it's really just an additional tax on motorists. That's all tickets really are. There's two great videos that go really well together, is The Story of Your Enslavement by Stefan Molyneux and How to Herd Tax Cattle Corbett. And the video is basically that the government exists to siphon money from people and to exploit and steal from them. But they realized that using a communist or a system where all the products of people's labor is stolen 100% causes some issues because it doesn't produce much wealth, or through a slavery system, it doesn't produce much wealth. But if you give people some freedom and you don't steal all the money in a portion, you actually get a higher return for your quote unquote investment if you just steal a smaller portion and let them have some freedom. It's basically free range slavery is what really we are living under, and you see in the videos some explanations, and it's two really interesting videos. You kind of have to watch them to really understand one of the reasons for things such as welfare as well. You want to make sure that your what they call tax cattle is, which is the citizen or whatever, is taken care of well, so that they can produce more, so that they can steal more from the citizens of a country. And you want to make sure that they're protected so that other countries or criminals within that country do not kill or harm the citizens of that country, because then they wouldn't be able to steal from anymore because they would be dead, or they would be stolen from by criminals in the country or foreign forces. There are some ways to avoid paying taxes as well and have sources for that, but it gets a bit complicated, so I'll just leave the sources. Mostly I won't talk much about it, but it is possible. Maybe not to avoid all, but you can avoid some. There are some loopholes, although a lot of the loopholes are being closed for avoiding taxes because, well, it does hurt the government obviously, so they don't want you to. Also, the government can't tax people 100% because if they did, people would rebel, since they would not only be upset, but they couldn't afford to live either. And it would destroy it. A lot of people would be like, well, I cannot afford to live now because of this. And they would take up arms. But so that means that the government has to get bonds and inflate the currency in order to pay for all their expenses, because the government is $1 trillion in debt, and it's similar for other countries elsewhere as well. You can't have a massive tyrannical government based on only taxes, because people would rebel against that. And many people, such as Mike Maloney, expect that the national debt is actually far higher than what people would say. So that's another thing to consider as well. But there's basically no way that the government could exist of the size that it does without inflation, bonds, and just making money out of thin air to pay for things as well. And one of the things that taxes also does is it pays down some of the inflation, because if hyperinflation happens, the whole system would collapse. The financial control system, global financial control system, would collapse, and that would not be very beneficial for the rulers of the world. Government also costs more when you pay by taxes. I know you say, well, all governments are paid by taxes, but I have a source, and a lot of stuff could be paid through voluntary means and it would be much cheaper, but I'll get into that more later. It's called a Ponzi scheme, which is basically also known as a pyramid scheme oftentimes. And the way that it is a Ponzi scheme, Social Security, is that it promised early on that it would help a lot of retired people retire financially stable. And it is true that early on there was, I think, 20 workers and one retiree. But now I think it's 3 workers for 1 retiree, and it's becoming more. There's more retirees, a far lower ratio, because of the baby boomers are now retiring, which was a huge population, because after World War II, a lot of soldiers came home and had babies from the losses in war. And so the system itself, Social Security, cannot stand, because it'll eventually become where there are more retirees than workers, and the system will completely collapse. So basically the taxes for Social Security, they're not even guaranteed. They're actually you're paying for other people's retirement, not your own. It is not guaranteed that you will get Social Security, especially if you're young now. You may not get it. Another thing is that government costs more when it is paid with inflation instead of just pure taxes, because with inflation, it not only reduces your purchasing power, but it also, because your income taxes, at least in the United States, all it does, according to the Grace Commission report, is go to paying down the national debt. So basically, the government wouldn't cost nearly as much because you wouldn't have income taxes, so you would have more money and less money would be being stolen from, which was definitely true before the creation of the IRS and the Federal Reserve. The primary way that banks make money is by making loans and then charging interest on those loans. But the thing about the loans is, and it's called fractional reserve banking, which is almost every bank in the entire world is a fractional reserve bank. But it means that they only need to have 10% of the money to make a loan. So if a bank received $10, they can make $100 in loans, then charge interest on those loans. So they make minimum 10 times more money than is what is put into the bank. And also they make money from having deposits in the bank because your deposits go towards loans. So if you have money deposited in the bank, is being used towards loans, and that will make them money as well. There's also another thing called bail-ins, and it's when banks who go bankrupt from, say, making poor gambles on the stock market they go into too much debt. They can do what's called a bail-in, which is opposite of bailout. Bailout is where you get money from outside the bank to cancel the debts of the bank. But a bail-in is where you take the money from the customers in a bank and use it to get out of debt. That's what a bank would do. And legally, banks can either take money from your account because you legally don't own it, and there's proof of that in the source of the video that I have linked on bail-ins, and they can also freeze your account, which is where you cannot access money anymore from your account. The FDIC, which is the government agent that is supposedly guarantees money for up to $25,000 for each account, does not have enough money to cover deposits, according to the OCCC stats for all Americans. So their claim that they can cover up $250,000 for each account is false, statistically just false. It happened in Cyprus, and there are plans that it will also happen to other Western nations such as EU, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and the United States. The Federal Reserve, which is the United States central banks, although every country almost except for 3 have a central bank, so this most likely, whatever country you reside in, your country probably has a central bank, but they exist. The reason that central bank exists is so they can fund the government using quantitative easing, which is basically the banks creating money out of thin air to fund the government, because you can't have a massive authoritarian government without a central bank, except for maybe with one exception, North Korea. But for the most part, you can't. So you need to borrow, like I said before, because if you have to pay everything that the government does through taxes, people would rebel because they would be taxed too much, and that's why they have to do it through inflation. So that's the main reason that the Federal Reserve and other central banks exist. In a nutshell, it gets quite more complex, and you can see in sources and for more information on the topic of Federal Reserve and central bank. It's quite complex. I actually have a hard time understanding myself. But that is basically what they're for. Fiat money is not real, and all fiat currencies in the entire world history always go to their actual value, which is 0, because fiat money is completely worthless. All it is based on, fiat comes from faith. Fiat means faith in Latin. So the only reason that money that is like cash money has any value is because people believe it has value. It has no intrinsic value, and if people lose faith in the value of the money, then it will no longer have value. Perceived value, I should say. But there is two metals that have always had value through every single period and place in history, and that was gold and silver. That is true money. Another system of theft and slavery is wars, which are used to steal the natural resources from other countries and give it either to foreign governments or banks or corporations or industries or financial institutions of other countries. That is the reason for wars, and I go more into depth on the previous episode of one of the major reasons for war being resources, so you can listen to that episode, and I'll have a link to that episode as well. Another system of slavery is prison, which most people in prison are locked up for victimless crimes, and many of them are forced to do work for corporations, and they're literally forced to work. I go more into depth on another one of my earlier podcasts, and I'll link to that one as well. One of the major forms of theft in our society is what is called socialism, but what is more accurate is to call it authoritarian economy, because it all based on control. That's all socialism is based on, is control and theft. And I like to call it an authoritarian economy because socialism makes it sound like it's social and it's a good thing, but it's not. It's absolutely terrible. It's based on theft. The lies of an authoritarian economy or socialism is forcing and coercing people to fund things, or what is referred to as government-controlled economy, and that is used to enslave people, and it is enslaving itself. And government is not the same as society. Just because you don't want the government to steal from people to pay for something you want done doesn't mean me or other non-socialist, non-authoritarian economy supporters want it done. And this is a quote from Frederick Bastiat, The Law, and it says, "Socialism, like the old policy from which it emanates, confounds government and society. And so every time we object to a thing being done by government, it concludes that we object to it being done at all. We disapprove of education by the state, then we are against education altogether. We object to the state religion, then we would have no religion at all. We object to inequality, which is brought about by the state, then we are against equality, etc., etc. They might as well accuse us of wishing men not to eat because we object to the cultivation of corn by the state." There are also many failures of socialism as well, and I have some sources in the description as well. But all it does is impoverish people, and it's under the guise of helping poor people, but really all it does is fund those who control the socialist system, which is usually an oligarch, such as in George Orwell's book 1984. It is usually just controlled by an oligarchy or a dictator. Under the guise of helping poor people or laborers or workers, millions, hundreds of millions of people have died because of socialism or an authoritarian economy, or really, it's just all authoritarianism. It doesn't matter if people say like, oh, this is politically or this is economically authoritarian or not. It's all authoritarianism. The authoritarianism is the belief that you have the right to do violence to others. That's all it boils down to, and you have no right to do that. You have no right to do violence to others. And that's the basis of authoritarianism. It doesn't matter what you call your system. You can call it socialism, fascism, call it capitalism, corporatism, doesn't matter what you call it. It's what you fundamentally is. Fundamentally what you do that matters. No matter what your system or group of people who does it, it still doesn't make it moral to do violence to others. No matter how many people, or if it's just one person. It does not matter who or how many. Violence is violence no matter what. It is immoral. People need to understand the difference between positive versus negative rights. Positive rights are not rights. It's a claim that some people make are rights. Like, I'll have the right to force people. I mean, that's what it fundamentally is. I have the right to force people to pay for things that I want done in society. You don't have the right to do that. Negative rights are true rights, and it's rights such as I have the right to not have violence done to me. That is the primary right, which is the basis of all other rights, such as the right to own any property you want, as long as it's legitimate property. And I have the right to own, say, like any guns, or say whatever I want to say, do whatever I want to do, as long as I don't hurt anyone. That's a negative right. That's an actual right. Another myth is the myth of democracy, which democracy is really just another form of socialism. If you don't believe me, here's a quote from Karl Marx. He says, "Democracy is the road to socialism." So there you go. That's what democracy is. And you know what socialism leads to? It leads to communism. And you know what communism leads to? Mass graves. That's what it leads to. If people are bad and shouldn't be trusted with freedom, then why would they be trusted with power? Are they better and believe that they're above everyone else? And this is a quote from Frederick Bastiat from The Law. "The pretensions of organizers suggest another question, which I have often asked them, to which I am not aware that I ever receive an answer. Since the natural tendencies of mankind are so bad that it is not safe to allow them liberty, how comes it to pass that the tendencies of organizers are always good? Do not the legislators and their agents form a part of the human race? Do they consider them that they are composed of different material from the rest of mankind? They say that society, when left to itself, rushes to inevitable destruction because its instincts are perverse. They presume to stop it in its downward course and give it a better direction. They have therefore received from heaven intelligence, virtues that they place them beyond and above mankind. Let them show their title to this superiority. They would be our shepherds and we are to be their flock. Their arrangement presuppose and them a natural superiority, the right to which we are fully justified in calling upon them to prove. You You must observe that I contend against their right to invent social combinations, to propagate them, and to recommend them, and to try them upon themselves at their own expense and risk. But I do not dispute their right to impose them upon us through the medium of law, and that is by force and by public taxes. Another thing is we are born into a slave system through birth certificates, which is used as a collateral and basically says that the banks own you. And Jordan Maxwell in his video goes into more depth, but it's a bit complicated, so I'll just leave the source for that in the references and sources. Banking has to be one of the greatest scams on earth, and it uses debt, usury, and the reduction of purchasing power via inflation to enslave people. And I have a video of, I think it's a 25-minute cartoon that goes pretty well into that subject, the history of banking and the Rothschilds in the United States and how it's used to financially control people as well, which is primarily what the banking system's for. A lot of people think it's about money, but it's primarily about control, really, if you look much deeper into it as well. The creation of dollars via inflation steals wealth from the United States and also every country, since United States dollar is the backing for every currency by the Bretton Woods Agreement, which I have sources and references to show or that helps explain what Bretton Woods is, but it was basically a conference that many wealthy people went to around the globe, set up a new monetary system for the globe, and it was to have every currency based on the dollar, and then the dollar be based on gold. But then Nixon ended the gold standard for the dollar, so that means that every currency in the world is backed by the United States dollar, which is backed by nothing but the faith that the dollar has value. A quote from Mike Mahoney explains this pretty well. No other country has this hidden advantage, the U.S. being able to print as much money as possible, and now the United States seems to consider it their birthright. This advantage gives the United States ability to run budget, trade, and other deficits and imbalances far in excess of anything the world has ever seen. It also gives the U.S. the ability to tax not only its own population, but also the population of the entire world through the inflation caused by deficit spending. Inflation of a currency supply respects no border. Therefore, every new dollar that is printed devalues all other dollars everywhere in the world, and also devalues the dollars of other currencies in the world as well. For the most part, I've talked about the problems of inflation, but deflation is also a problem as well, but for different reasons. In deflation, prices and wages go down and are adjusted. However, your debt is still the same after inflation, which means it's more difficult to pay debts, impossible to pay. And this is a quote from Mike Mahoney as well from his book, Investing in Gold and Silver. But in a deflation, just as about everything declines, including your wages, prices, gross domestic product, and the money supply, most importantly for your income. In the Great Depression, nominal income fell by 53%. Using my auxiliary example, your monthly income will now be $47 instead of $100. You might be thinking to yourself, yeah, but aren't prices falling too? So my purchasing power stays the same? Well, yes and no. Even though your prices are falling to match income, debt isn't. It's nominal, which means it's a fixed number. So your debt payments are still $40, but your income is now $47. You can forget about the movie, the gas in your tank, and your insurance. You can even forget about your utilities because all you got left after servicing your debt is $7, and you're going to need that to eat. The way fractional banking works is bank can loan 10 times more than they have in deposits. So that means that if a bank has $10 in their deposits, they can loan $100. I found an interesting article. It was from Canada. I'm sure you find information for other countries as well. It pretty much proves that government cares more about tax evasion than any other crime. The statistics in this article, the link I have in the recent sources, you can see that the law enforcement in Canada on average cares more about tax evasion, things such as murder, and for the most part, about 90% of violent crimes get away with actions which I think the majority of people would consider far worse than tax evasion. Not a crime where you're avoiding stolen. I'd say that's a virtue, to be honest. And so it's just absurd. I'm sure it's similar in other countries. The ways that people are cautious is actually by government spending, because the more they spend, that means the more money in circulation, which would mean that more money in circulation means higher inflation. It's more difficult to buy the same goods that you bought, and also a lot of times it just goes, taxes just go to bureaucrats, not to the actual administration of government agency instead of what it's going towards. Another way our society, this is global society, is based on that is the IMF and World Bank together. One thing that they do is they'll either trick a country to, usually a third world country, that IMF and World Bank are based on global bank. things. Like they'll trick a country into accepting a loan, or they'll cut off their imports and exports, which absolutely cripple a country, since not every country is completely self-sustaining. By cutting off trade forcibly, that is one way to reply, but it's basically a way to conquer a nation now, sending troops in by either tricking them to take a loan from them at very high interest rates later on, but it's all in the name of supposedly developed country. But what it does is it forces the country to basically be enslaved to a global bank, and instead of the people in that country being take care of themselves, they have to spend their money on paying bankers instead. And I have four good sources on that. But the IMF also is known for supporting dictatorships as well. If you want to care about the impoverished, which they always claim, the IMF bank always claims to help, then why would you support dictators? Dictators just simply oppress and steal from people. That's not helping impoverished, it's hurting whenever they support dictatorships. Another scam is the Social Security system. And initially, the ratio between workers and retirees was 20 to 1. So for every 20 workers, there was one retired person. But now it's a ratio of, I think, 3 to 1. It might even be 2 to 1 now. But basically, that means 2 workers are being stolen from to pay one retiree. It's not cheap to pay for someone who's retired a lot of times. There's a lot of expensive medical bills and things that be accounted for disability checks, because older people are more likely to save some way, like such as Alzheimer's, maybe physical handicap. So it's not a sustainable system, and eventually there'll be more retirees than workers, and you'd have to raise the cost of Social Security payments, which is forced to pay for someone else's retirement. You're not paying for your own retirement. It's not guaranteed to. That's another thing a lot of people don't understand. An excellent video on some of the history of what money is and what money is Hidden Secrets of Money by Mike. He has a really good couple-part series, and it's very high quality, good animations, excellent sound, and he goes over basically his financial system for the globe from Greece, ancient Greece. So it's a really good video, and out of all the resources for explaining how the financial system that slaves to what I would highly recommend. One thing that people need to be aware of is that a lot of times they might say that their wage, for example, increases, but it's often just for inflation. You're not actually getting a higher wage. There's a difference between price of an item, value of an item, because prices are based off inflation, but value is not on inflation. So price per item might go up, but then all the other items go up. That doesn't mean that item is worth more. It just means it costs. There's a difference, and that's just something people should be aware of. Things get more expensive. It's probably not just that. It may not just be that. Everyone has to pay attention for inflation, because one of the things that Mike Maloney goes over is that inflation can hit very rapidly. It could go up if you start seeing things go up slightly more. It can go in a matter of just a couple days to hyperinflation. Everything costs like 200 times more. So you have to pay attention to inflation and know about the struggle, because he believes, and I would concur, that hyperinflation may come one day, someday. No one's for sure, but it probably come, or at least modern inflation. Quite drastic. It's modern inflation. Using gold and silver is an easy, safe investment. Also will reduce inflation, as banks can loan out that money. Whenever they loan out money that's based on fractional reserve, they're literally creating money whenever they make a loan. So it's not only a way to have a safe investment, it also protects against hyperinflation, make you a little bit of money too if you buy it when it's cheap and it's more expensive. That's not the primary purpose. It also will prevent inflation, hyperinflation. It can be really good if you have like gold and silver. You don't. It's going to hurt extremely bad, such as the Great Depression. Although that was deep, but those who weren't prepared, they had their bank accounts wiped, and they couldn't live, and just couldn't take it. If the bank closes or the power grid blows out, that's another thing you have to consider. If you have gold and silver money, the best way to store gold and silver, one person who you know well is trustworthy, and keep a secret who knows you have gold and silver in case you die or disable. Or if you store either in secure vault services, banks, or store it at home, it's right around, especially so people see you store or digging silver in a road safe. Or you store underground as well, not in storage, just easy. You can store more than 4 feet of metal. Store it inside as well. If you do store, that is the layers. Example is a carbon under a piece of furniture, terribly heavy. So you want the vault to be heavy to prevent thieves or adding metal add to the weight. So optimal way is you don't want it to be too heavy. Make sure the vault is tough and resistant to tools such as torques, smash. This advice is mostly for storing large gold and silver. You can easily store large amounts and smaller amounts without using safe vaults and large amounts. Either if it's small or large, it would be way too easy for a thief. The way you can test gold and silver. A couple ways you can test gold and silver is using a magnet. And if it repels, that's a good sign. Gold and silver repel. And you can use a scale to determine weight of gold or silver. Kits to test the gold, silver, they're called nitric kits, and you can test the buoyancy. Both the gold and silver should sink. There's a couple ways to sell silver. If you are going to sell silver, a person you can sell to online and also offline. Access to internet stations. You also want to make sure that get a good deal for selling it back, because oftentimes sell back full price that you bought it for. But you want to get close to what you bought it for. It's called the ask price. Buying gold and silver is what is called commodity trading, and that means you're buying physical goods for the purpose of investing. Well, at least it's a form of commodity trading or sell forms. It's a great way to invest, and also it can survive during emergencies. Power grid goes out or such as that, you'll still have value assets, such as like a couple of commodities could be one of food. Say if you have food, you prepare it as well for an economic downfall or collapse. In gold and silver, you can use that to trade as well, which it's been used for thousands of years. So even though people say you can't eat gold and silver, we'll use it to trade. And there's other commodities as well, such as oil or guns and ammo. Things that can help you a situation where power grid goes out. They're also sells well, but the easiest thing you can always sell is gold and silver, and it's easy to store, much better than oil, such as that. It's best to store. It has many of the properties that make for good trade, good currency. Gold and silver, so it's great society that you can trade by basically do whatever you want, as long as you're not based in morale, where you cannot do certain, as government says you can't. Like trade certain goods, so certain things, license can't have eliminated standards, and without a license, it goes on and on. And that's not based morality. You should be able to do whatever, as long as you license, you arrest, and stored it. It's just not a way to society. It's just stealing and slavery. One of the solutions is the Thrive. The Thrive movement is a bit of a long documentary. It's quite a bit more free market, but it's all about having to set up a society and a prosperous one, which is why it's called Thrive. And it also goes to free energy technology quite a bit, which I'll discuss later. But there's also a Austrian economics that probably the most realistic. One of the solutions for a society that is voluntary and basically, and I have many sources about that, but the basis of Austrian every trade should be transaction period based on voluntary. There's also the Venus Project. It's a bit more question. I'd say it's generally a good idea, at least in theory, but it's based on using technology to provide for society. And they also have a video. I have sources, but I won't get into them much. Probably one of my favorite. I think this one's also quite different. Like, for example, economics. A lot should be done either politics or your business, but agorism is an authoritarian society, and it's counteracts basically avoiding taxes and just doing trade. And agorists, great about agorists, finds theory and practice for philosophies. You can't just read all books on how to create a free market. You have to also practice it. Ways of practice is by disobeying regulation, etc. As long as it's sponsor problem. You not always be wise though, just to obey power, but you do have the right, in some cases, the moral duty to disobey the government, such as subscription, such as a hurts others. And I believe that using policy to end the status slavery basis is worth this. To me, it's like fighting fire. You don't want to fight fire with fire. Fire. That's what I would say. Counter economics. There's also private cities. Interesting concept. I have sources, but it's the idea that have cities which are independent and they're run and they're funded on voluntary consent instead of forced by a large external government that isn't more local based. There's having a city ruled by another city potentially thousands of miles away. It just makes no sense. It's more local. It's also based. Another good solution is the machinery of freedom. David has an interesting theory of using protection agencies to protect people and defend property rights outside the state. I have a source great video. And people wonder about welfare. And think about the United States, actually the most charitable country, and entirely voluntary. Both of this is definitely possible. Plenty of the United States, plus many non-government or NGOs, churches, providers. So I think it isn't too far. There's also free energy. It isn't really free. It is what is called free energy. But it's one of the ways that if you look at the sources, there is many knowledge and people who have been killed or not received any funding or had their patents. Not that I really believe patents, but in the current system we have now, you might get for sanctions a lot of times. So you do not have a patent, get funding for, but there are many hundred devices which do things such as power a car using only a little bit of water, and other energy methods are much safer, a lot less polluting our current system, just based coal, gas, and air. It's also even better. Green is quite expensive, but free energy is much cheaper, possibly even safer. Better green energy require a lot of research. That was episode 6, Our Society Space Labor. Contact me for questions. Also tell me what you're struggling with. This is an addition to this outro. I will be making the next episode. It should be even more. I'm trying to make it better each time. It's probably going to be a bit longer. I might do one of my podcasts, but maybe make it longer. Since it's like it 4 hours, but I want to go because I want to go in depth, brushing over topics quickly for a short period of time. I want to get at least a little bit more in depth. I don't want to get. I mean, obviously, I can't go in super depth on a 10-hour podcast. It might not be.